Okay, today we're going to begin in Romans chapter 9. Now, Romans 9, 10, and 11 are unique chapters. It has to be put in context. If you just go over and you start reading in chapter 9, you can understand what it's saying, but you would say, why is he saying this? And so you have to put things in context. It's kind of like if somebody had walked in while I was telling about my eyesight there before class. They got in at the last of that. They didn't know anything else, but they got in. And so I was talking about, and my ceiling, that dingy ceiling just turned white. Well, they would go away. They wouldn't have the slightest idea what I was talking about. They might think, well, Lowell thinks that there's a miracle taking place or something, that a dingy ceiling, you wouldn't know. You'd understand what I was saying, but you wouldn't know. But to put it in context, well, then you can laugh about it and you can say, well, it's just a silly thing. Now, the same way is true with Romans 9, 10, and 11. So we're going to take just a little time here to begin to introduce this section to us so we can see really how important it is. Now, we've studied the first 8 chapters, and in the first 8 chapters, it has told us the gospel tells mankind how to be saved by faith and not by the Jewish law of works. That's what it's all about. It's telling us this, salvation by faith, not by the Jewish law of works, which demanded perfect works. Now, in these first 8 chapters, why Paul condemns the Jews as sinners just like he does the Gentiles. He spends time showing Gentiles are sinners, Jews are sinners. Then in chapter 3, they're both sinners. He drives that point home about how all people are sinners and everybody needs salvation. So here it is, he puts Jew and Gentile on the same basis that you need salvation. Now this, of course, is a shocker to the Jews because the Jews have been living for all these many years, 1,600 years, under the law of Moses. And they've been living with the idea that they're God's chosen people, which they were. And so there's something special about them. And then all of a sudden, here comes Paul and he's teaching. Now really, there's no difference between a Jew and a Gentile. You're both sinners and you both need to be saved. And you can't be saved by perfect works because nobody's perfect. So you're going to have to accept the gospel of Christ and be saved by the system of faith in Christ. Now, this would not be a shocking thing to a Gentile. They would say, wow, this is really good news. But to a Jew, it's the most derogatory thing you could say is that we're no better than a Gentile. And so it's hard for them to accept. And they had a hard time all the way through the New Testament period of accepting that one idea. Now, in chapters 9 through 11, Paul is going to explain how those in Christ are God's chosen people rather than the physical Jews. Now, he's going to show that, you Jews, you were chosen by God. But he's going to say, let me tell you something. When you were chosen by God, there's something else that you didn't understand, and he's going to explain it. And that is that he chose the physical nation of the Jews, but he wasn't interested in a physical nation. He was interested in a spiritual nation, and there's something that you don't understand. The physical nation of Israel is not important with the exception of one thing, and that is just to bring the Christ into existence so he could die on the cross and we could be saved by faith. Now this is going to be quite a shocker to the Jews. You're telling us that we're not the most important people in all the world. 2,100 years ago, God called Abraham out of the Ur of the Chaldees and said, through thy seed, I will bless all nations. And he used Abraham to begin the Hebrew or Jewish nation. 400 years later, he called Moses and gave him the law. He gave it only to the Jews. So for the past 1,600 years, the Jews have lived under that law. Now here comes Paul, and Paul said, let me tell you Jews something. You're no better than a Gentile. absolutely no better than a Gentile. Shocking. How could anybody accept such a thing as that? And so this is a problem that the Jews had to deal with all through the first century, and Paul had to deal with it in different books in explaining these various things. The question is, how can God choose the physical nation of Israel through Abraham, which he did, and then bring in the Gentiles as equals with the Jews, and say that there's no difference in them, which he has? That's what he said in the first 8 chapters of the book of Romans here. Now, chapters 9 through 11 is going to answer that. It's going to show how God purposed spiritual Israel rather than physical Israel from the beginning. He's going to show that way back when God called Abraham out of the Ur of the Chaldees, when he said, through thy seed, what he was talking about was a spiritual relationship and not a physical. That's what he's going to deal with that is in here. And it's going to be a shocking thing to these people. Now, it's a shocking thing to people today to hear somebody talk like I'm talking today, that the nation of Israel is not an important nation. The nation of Israel was destroyed in 70 AD. God destroyed it. And people today have tried to set up the nation. You know, in 1948, of course, America set up the nation of Israel, and we're in wars about it right now. And one thing is, we've got to stand with the nation of Israel because God is going to bring the nation of Israel back, and none of that is taught in the Bible. None of it is taught in the Bible. The nation of Israel was chosen by God to bring Christ into existence, and when that happened, then there was no further purpose for the nation of Israel. And anything that we have to say about the purpose of Israel from that day forward really is not found in the Bible. So he tells them there that they have this physical, therefore he loves them. Now, he's going to show us, Paul tells them that he himself is from the physical nation of Israel. He said, I also am an Israelite, and therefore I love you. It's just like me saying, I'm an American, and I love Americans. So if I were up here today getting ready to tell you that Americans are no more important than anybody else, well, I might want to let you know that I'm not prejudiced. I myself am an American. Then he shows Christ himself was from Israel. Therefore, Israel is very important. So don't get the idea that I'm saying that Israel is not important. That's what Paul is saying. He said, don't get that idea. He said, because Israel is very important. Then he says, but physical Israel was only an instrument used by God to bring in spiritual Israel. Now this is going to be the interesting thing. And this is what he's going to show us. That Israel was an instrument. That's all it was. Israel was an instrument to bring in the Christ, to bring in spiritual Israel. And that's the only importance that Israel has that is in there. So spiritual Israel is what God has planned before eternity. In that great eternal plan of God, it was always spiritual Israel that he had planned, that is in there. Now, chapters 9 through 11 are going to talk about God's working out his eternal plan by using various instruments. And physical Israel was just one of those instruments that he had. So he's going to be showing that. Now, I'll tell you what I'm going to do before I get into this section. I've been on a spatial diet for the past week. I'm getting dizzy, and I think I might pass out if I stand up here very long. I'm going to close class right now. Scott, you got anything you want to say? And if not, we're going to close right now. This happened to me a couple of days ago.